Telepathy, mind-to-mind communication. Part 1. The mystery of silent communication. Imagine thinking of someone you haven't spoken to in years. And moments later, your phone rings. It's them. Or perhaps you've walked into a room and instantly sensed that something was wrong, long before anyone spoke a single word. Maybe you've finished another person's sentence. Shared the same unusual thought at exactly the same moment. Or known what someone was about to say before they opened their mouth. Most people have experienced moments like these. Usually, they are dismissed as coincidence. But what if they are something more? What if the human mind is capable of communicating without speech, writing, gestures, or technology? This possibility has fascinated humanity for thousands of years. It has appeared in ancient religions, indigenous traditions, Eastern philosophies, military research, psychology, and modern neuroscience. The idea has many names. Mind-to-mind communication, thought transference, mental connection. But today it is most commonly known as telepathy. The word itself comes from two Greek roots. Tele, meaning distant, and pathos, meaning feeling or perception. Literally translated, it means distant perception. For believers, telepathy represents one of the most remarkable abilities the human mind might possess. A direct exchange of thoughts, emotions, or images without using the five known senses. For skeptics, however, telepathy reflects something very different. The extraordinary ability of the human brain to recognize patterns, interpret subtle social cues, and remember the rare coincidences while forgetting the countless times nothing unusual occurred. Between these viewpoints lies one of the oldest mysteries in the study of consciousness. Can thoughts travel from one mind to another? Throughout history, people have answered this question in very different ways. Ancient shamans believed minds could communicate across great distances. Religious mystics described silent communion between souls. 20th century scientists attempted to test the phenomenon under laboratory conditions. Governments quietly funded experiments. Psychologists analyzed thousands of reports. Even today, researchers continue investigating whether some form of information transfer occurs beyond ordinary perception. Unlike many paranormal claims, telepathy has been subjected to decades of scientific testing. Some experiments have reported intriguing statistical results. Others have found no convincing evidence at all. The debate has never truly ended. Perhaps because the experiences themselves continue. Identical twins sensing each other's pain. Parents waking moments before their child cries. Couples claiming they can communicate without speaking. Close friends sharing identical thoughts at precisely the same moment. Are these examples of telepathy? Or simply the natural consequences of deep emotional bonds and shared experiences? In this audiobook, we will examine both sides of the mystery. We will explore the ancient origins of telepathy, the scientists who attempted to prove it, the military programs that secretly investigated it, the experiments that continue today, and the psychological explanations that challenge extraordinary claims. Rather than asking you what to believe, we will ask a different question. What does the evidence actually tell us? Because the story of telepathy is not simply about psychic powers. It is about the nature of consciousness itself. How thoughts arise. How minds connect. And whether the boundaries between us are as solid as they appear. To begin our journey, we must travel back thousands of years to a time when silent communication was considered not extraordinary, but perfectly natural. Part 2, Ancient Beliefs, the Origins of Mind-to-Mind Communication. Long before the invention of writing. Long before telephones, radios, or the internet. People believed that thoughts could travel across invisible distances. The idea appeared in cultures separated by thousands of miles, each describing remarkably similar experiences using different languages and traditions. Although the details varied, the central belief remained surprisingly consistent. The human mind was not entirely confined to the physical body. In ancient Egypt, priests believed that dreams and states of deep meditation could allow communication beyond ordinary perception. Messages from the gods, ancestors, or distant individuals were often thought to arrive through visions rather than spoken words. Across ancient Greece, philosophers explored the relationship between mind and soul. The philosopher Plato proposed that reality extended beyond what the senses could perceive. Although he did not describe telepathy in the modern sense, later philosophers interpreted some of his ideas as suggesting that minds might share access to deeper truths beyond ordinary experience. The Stoics believed that the universe was connected by a universal principle they called the logos. According to their philosophy, all living things were linked through this invisible order. While not a theory of telepathy, it reflected the ancient belief that separation between minds might be less absolute than it appears. In India, the ancient Hindu texts known as the Upanishads described consciousness as fundamentally unified. Individual minds were often viewed as expressions of a greater universal awareness. Within certain yogic traditions, advanced meditation was believed to awaken extraordinary mental abilities, known as siddhis. Among these abilities were descriptions that resembled telepathic communication, including the perception of another person's thoughts or intentions. In Buddhist traditions, particularly within advanced meditative practices, some texts describe highly accomplished practitioners developing heightened awareness of other minds. These accounts were generally presented not as magical powers to pursue, but as possible byproducts of deep concentration and spiritual discipline. Many indigenous cultures around the world have also preserved traditions involving silent communication. Some Native American oral histories describe hunters sensing danger before it became visible. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of what is sometimes called thought communication across great distances, although interpretations vary among communities and should not be generalized. For many indigenous peoples, the natural world itself was viewed as interconnected. Communication was understood to occur not only through words but through intuition, dreams, symbols, and relationships with nature. In parts of Africa, South America, and Polynesia, similar beliefs emerged. Stories told of family members sensing illness or death from hundreds of miles away. Mothers awakening suddenly because a child far away needed help. Warriors receiving silent warnings before battle. Whether understood spiritually or psychologically, these traditions emphasized connection rather than separation. During the Middle Ages in Europe, interpretations changed dramatically. Reports of unusual mental communication were often filtered through religious beliefs. Some experiences were regarded as divine inspiration. Others were viewed with suspicion or fear. By the Renaissance, scholars once again began asking whether such phenomena might have natural explanations. The Enlightenment brought increasing emphasis on reason, observation, and experimentation. Claims of telepathy were no longer accepted simply because they appeared in tradition. They demanded evidence. Yet even as science advanced, stories of unexplained mental connections continued. Explorers documented similar beliefs among cultures that had never interacted. Missionaries recorded accounts they struggled to explain. Doctors heard patients describe experiences that did not fit conventional medical understanding. By the 19th century, curiosity about telepathy had grown beyond folklore. It became the subject of organized scientific investigation. Researchers sought to answer a question that had echoed through history. Could thoughts truly pass from one mind to another? Or were these stories simply revealing something extraordinary about human psychology? That question would inspire the first serious scientific studies of telepathy and give birth to an entirely new field of research known as parapsychology. Part 3: The birth of scientific research. Can telepathy be tested? By the late 19th century, science was transforming the world. Electricity illuminated cities. The telephone carried voices across continents. X-rays revealed the hidden interior of the human body. Invisible forces that once seemed impossible were becoming everyday reality. Against this backdrop, some researchers began asking an unusual question. If electricity could travel invisibly through wires, could thoughts travel invisibly between minds? Rather than relying on folklore or personal testimony, they wanted to investigate the question scientifically. In 1882, a group of distinguished scholars, philosophers, physicians, and scientists in Britain founded an organization that would become central to this effort. It was called the Society for Psychical Research, often abbreviated as the SPR. Its mission was ambitious: to examine extraordinary human experiences using the same careful methods applied to other areas of science. The founders included respected academics from the universities of Cambridge and Oxford. Many were skeptical. Some expected the investigations to disprove paranormal claims. Others believed genuine discoveries might be waiting. What united them was a commitment to evidence rather than assumption. Among the first subjects they investigated was telepathy. Researchers collected thousands of reports from ordinary people. Stories of family members sensing danger. Twins experiencing identical emotions. Parents waking suddenly moments before receiving tragic news. Friends sharing the same thought at exactly the same time. These personal accounts were intriguing. But anecdotes alone could never establish scientific proof. Controlled experiments would be necessary. Early telepathy experiments were remarkably simple. One participant, known as the sender, concentrated intensely on a picture, number, or object. Another participant, the receiver, attempted to describe what the sender was thinking. The two individuals were separated to prevent ordinary communication. Sometimes they occupied different rooms. Sometimes entirely different buildings. The results were mixed. Many sessions produced no meaningful correspondence at all. Others appeared surprisingly accurate. Researchers quickly realized the greatest challenge was eliminating every possible source of ordinary information. Could participants hear faint sounds? Notice subtle movements? Receive accidental clues from the experimenters? Even unconscious facial expressions might influence the outcome. As experimental methods improved, scientists introduced increasingly rigorous controls. Blind procedures. Randomized targets. Independent observers. Detailed statistical analysis. These innovations laid the foundation for modern psychological experimentation. Although the early results remained controversial, they inspired researchers around the world to continue exploring telepathy. One of the most influential investigators was Frederick W. H. Myers, a classical scholar and one of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research. Myers believed the human mind extended far beyond ordinary conscious awareness. He proposed the concept of the subliminal self, a vast layer of mental activity operating beneath conscious thought. According to Myers, telepathy might represent communication occurring within this deeper level of consciousness. Although modern psychology no longer accepts many of Myers' conclusions, his ideas influenced generations of researchers studying consciousness. Another important figure was Edmund Gurney, who helped document hundreds of spontaneous reports involving dreams, coincidences, and possible telepathic experiences. Together with Myers and Frank Podmore, he published one of the largest collections of such cases available at the time. Their work remains historically significant, even though many of its conclusions continue to be debated. By the early 20th century, scientific attitudes had become increasingly divided. Some researchers believed the accumulating evidence justified continued investigation. Others argued that the experiments lacked sufficient consistency and methodological rigor. The disagreement was not simply about telepathy. It reflected a deeper question. How should science investigate phenomena that appear rare, unpredictable, and difficult to reproduce? This debate continues today. But the search for better evidence took a major step forward during the 1930s. At Duke University in North Carolina, one psychologist believed he could finally settle the question using mathematics. His name was Dr. J. B. Rhine. His experiments would become the most famous, and the most controversial, in the history of telepathy research. Part 4: J. B. Rhine and the Zener card experiments. In the early 1930s, a young botanist turned psychologist set out to answer one of the oldest questions in human history. Could telepathy be measured scientifically? His name was Dr. Joseph Banks Rhine, better known simply as J.B. Rhine. Working at Duke University in North Carolina, Rhine believed that if telepathy existed, it should be possible to detect it using controlled laboratory experiments and statistical analysis. Rather than relying on dramatic stories or personal testimony, he wanted numbers, probabilities, repeatable experiments, objective results. To accomplish this, Rhine collaborated with psychologist Carl Zener, who designed a simple set of symbols that would become famous throughout the world. These became known as Zener cards. The deck contained 25 cards made up of only 5 symbols: a circle, a square, a cross, a star, and 3 wavy lines. Each symbol appeared exactly 5 times in every deck. The simplicity was intentional. Complex images might be interpreted differently by different people. Simple geometric shapes reduced ambiguity and made the results easier to analyze statistically. The experiments were straightforward. One participant acted as the sender. They looked at a randomly selected card while concentrating intensely on its image. Another participant, the receiver, attempted to identify the symbol without seeing it. Because there were 5 possible choices, random guessing should produce a correct answer about 20% of the time. If telepathy existed, Rhine reasoned, successful participants should consistently score significantly above chance. Thousands of trials were conducted. Some participants scored exactly as probability predicted. Others appeared to perform much better. One of Rhine's most famous test subjects was a Duke University student named Hubert Pierce. During certain experiments, Pierce achieved scores that Rhine believed were statistically extraordinary. These results attracted international attention. Newspapers proclaimed that telepathy had finally entered the laboratory. Supporters hailed Rhine as the father of modern parapsychology. Universities around the world began conducting similar experiments. For the first time, psychic research seemed to possess a quantitative scientific foundation. But excitement was soon followed by criticism. Other researchers attempted to repeat Rhine's findings. Some reported similar positive results. Many did not. Skeptics carefully examined the experimental procedures. They suggested that tiny flaws might explain at least some of the unusually high scores. Could participants have seen reflections in polished surfaces? Could cards have developed tiny marks through repeated handling? Were subtle cues from experimenters unintentionally influencing the volunteers? Even unconscious body language can communicate information without anyone realizing it. These concerns led to increasingly rigorous controls. Researchers began using opaque card holders, improved randomization, double-blind procedures, automated recording systems. As the experiments became more carefully controlled, the reported effects often became smaller and more difficult to reproduce consistently. Rhine himself acknowledged many of these challenges. Rather than claiming telepathy had been definitively proven, he argued that the statistical evidence justified continued investigation. He believed that psychic abilities, if they existed, were influenced by factors that science had not yet identified. Fatigue, motivation, emotional state, attention, perhaps even the relationship between sender and receiver. These variables, he suggested, might explain why results fluctuated so dramatically from one experiment to another. One of Rhine's lasting contributions had little to do with whether telepathy was ultimately real. He introduced rigorous statistical methods into the study of extraordinary claims. Instead of asking, "Did something amazing happen?" researchers began asking, "Could this result reasonably have occurred by chance?" That shift transformed the field. Today, virtually all scientific studies of telepathy rely on statistical analysis pioneered during Rhine's era. Although many scientists remain unconvinced by his conclusions, they recognize that his methods helped establish a more disciplined approach to investigating controversial subjects. Rhine's work also inspired an entirely new generation of researchers. Some focused on telepathy. Others expanded into clairvoyance, precognition, psychokinesis, and consciousness studies. Perhaps the most influential experiments after Rhine's would abandon cards altogether. Instead of guessing simple symbols, participants attempted something far more ambitious. They tried to transmit entire images, scenes, and emotions from one mind to another. These became known as the Ganzfeld experiments, and they remain among the most discussed studies in the modern history of telepathy research. Part 5: The Ganzfeld Experiments, a New Approach to Telepathy. By the 1970s, many researchers believed the classic Zener card experiments had reached their limits. Simple symbols had been useful for early statistical testing. But some scientists wondered whether telepathy, if it existed, might work better under more natural conditions. After all, people who claimed spontaneous telepathic experiences rarely described receiving images of circles or squares. They spoke of emotions, faces, places, dreams, entire scenes. Researchers began asking a different question. What if the conscious mind itself was getting in the way? Our brains are constantly flooded with information. Sounds, light, movement, conversation, internal thoughts. Perhaps this endless stream of sensory input was masking subtle mental impressions. To test this possibility, psychologists developed a new experimental method. It became known as the Ganzfeld experiment. The word Ganzfeld comes from German and means whole field. The goal was to place the receiver into a state of mild sensory reduction. Not hypnosis. Not sleep. Simply a quiet, relaxed condition with as few distractions as possible. The setup became famous. The receiver sat comfortably in a reclining chair. Soft red light illuminated the room. Half ping-pong balls were gently placed over the eyes, creating an even field of light with no distinct shapes to focus on. White noise, or a gentle rushing sound, played through headphones. The environment minimized visual and auditory distractions, allowing participants to concentrate on whatever thoughts or images entered their minds. Meanwhile, in another room, the sender viewed a randomly selected target. The target might be a photograph, a short film clip, a painting, or another vivid visual scene. For several minutes, the sender focused intensely on transmitting the image mentally. The receiver simply described every impression that arose. Colors, textures, shapes, emotions, movement, fragments of scenes. Nothing was dismissed. Even vague sensations were recorded. After the session ended, the receiver was shown 4 possible targets. One was the actual image viewed by the sender. The other 3 served as decoys. If telepathy played no role, random guessing should identify the correct target about 1/4 of the time. Researchers then compared the results across hundreds, and eventually thousands, of sessions. Some studies reported success rates modestly higher than chance. While the improvement was not dramatic, supporters argued that the statistical differences accumulated over many experiments. Several meta-analyses, studies combining the results of multiple experiments, suggested that the overall findings exceeded what random chance alone might predict. These results generated considerable excitement within parapsychology. Advocates argued that the Ganzfeld experiments represented some of the strongest laboratory evidence for telepathy ever obtained. Unlike earlier studies, the procedures included random target selection, independent judging, and increasingly sophisticated controls. Yet critics remained unconvinced. Some questioned whether subtle flaws still existed in the experimental design. Others argued that publication bias might influence the results. Studies producing positive findings are generally more likely to be published than studies finding no effect. If unsuccessful experiments remained unpublished, the combined statistics could appear stronger than they truly were. Another concern involved replication. Some laboratories reported positive results. Others did not. Although several large reviews found small but statistically significant effects, critics emphasized that science requires consistent replication across independent research groups. Without that consistency, they argued, extraordinary conclusions remain premature. Researchers responded by improving their methods yet again. Computerized randomization replaced manual procedures. Double-blind protocols ensured that neither participants nor experimenters knew the target during the session. Independent judges scored the results. Statistical analyses became increasingly rigorous. Despite these improvements, the debate continued. Supporters maintained that a small but genuine telepathic effect had survived increasingly strict controls. Skeptics argued that the evidence remained too inconsistent to establish a new scientific phenomenon. Today, the Ganzfeld experiments occupy an unusual place in psychology. They are among the most carefully designed studies ever conducted on telepathy. They are also among the most debated. Neither side claims complete victory. For some researchers, the results justify continued investigation. For others, they illustrate how difficult it is to distinguish subtle psychological effects from genuine anomalies. Regardless of where one stands, the Ganzfeld experiments transformed the scientific study of telepathy. They demonstrated that even extraordinary claims could be explored using careful methodology, statistical analysis, and open scientific debate. But telepathy would soon attract attention far beyond university laboratories. During the Cold War, governments began asking whether silent communication between minds could become a tool of intelligence and national security. Part 6: Telepathy and the Cold War, Government Research into the Human Mind. During the Cold War, the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union extended far beyond nuclear weapons, space exploration, and conventional espionage. Both nations searched constantly for any technology or human ability that might provide even the slightest strategic advantage. If an unusual phenomenon had even a small chance of being useful, many believed it deserved investigation. Among the ideas that attracted attention was telepathy. Rumors circulated that Soviet scientists were investing significant resources into the study of psychic phenomena, including telepathy, psychokinesis, hypnosis, and extrasensory perception. Some intelligence reports suggested that military applications were being explored. Exactly how extensive those Soviet programs were remains a matter of historical debate. Many claims were based on intelligence assessments rather than publicly available scientific evidence. Nevertheless, the perception that a geopolitical rival might be pursuing such research influenced decision-makers in the West. American officials reasoned that if there were even a remote possibility that telepathy or related phenomena could contribute to intelligence gathering, communication, or psychological operations, ignoring the subject might carry its own risks. This concern helped justify funding for exploratory research. Several U.S. government agencies sponsored investigations into what became broadly known as parapsychology. Some projects focused on remote viewing, which attempted to describe distant locations without using the known senses. Others explored telepathy more directly, asking whether information could be transmitted mentally between individuals under controlled conditions. Scientists involved in these programs generally avoided sensational language. Instead of speaking about psychic powers, they referred to concepts such as anomalous cognition, information transfer, or extrasensory perception. Their objective was not to confirm folklore. It was to determine whether any measurable effect could be demonstrated under laboratory conditions. Researchers designed increasingly sophisticated experiments. Participants were isolated from one another. Communication channels were eliminated. Random target selection reduced the possibility of unconscious cues. Statistical methods evaluated whether correct responses exceeded what chance alone would predict. Some experiments reported intriguing results. Others found none. As with earlier university studies, consistency proved elusive. The same participant might perform well during one series of tests and no better than chance during another. This variability made practical application extremely difficult. Military organizations require dependable methods. A technology that succeeds unpredictably is rarely useful in operational settings. Even so, government interest continued for years. Former participants have described studies involving emotionally connected pairs of volunteers. Twins. Married couples. Close friends. Researchers wondered whether strong emotional bonds might improve telepathic performance. Although a few studies suggested possible trends, no universally accepted conclusions emerged. Another area of investigation involved altered states of consciousness. Would meditation improve results? What about relaxation techniques? Sensory reduction? Biofeedback? Researchers experimented with numerous variables, hoping to identify conditions under which telepathic effects, if they existed, might become stronger. The findings remained mixed. Perhaps the most important lesson learned during these programs was methodological rather than paranormal. Scientists developed increasingly rigorous experimental controls. Double-blind procedures. Automated randomization. Independent statistical analysis. Many of these methods later became standard practice in psychological research far beyond parapsychology. By the early 1990s, geopolitical priorities had changed. The Cold War had ended. Funding shifted toward more immediate intelligence needs. Many government-sponsored investigations into psychic phenomena were discontinued. When previously classified documents were later released, they surprised the public. The documents confirmed that governments had indeed spent years examining telepathy, remote viewing, and related claims. However, they did not conclude that telepathy had been established as a reliable operational capability. Instead, the records revealed a far more nuanced picture. Researchers encountered occasional results that appeared intriguing. They also encountered inconsistency, methodological challenges, and difficulties reproducing findings reliably enough for intelligence work. Supporters interpreted the investigations as evidence that governments had taken telepathy seriously. Skeptics viewed the same history as an example of governments exploring unconventional ideas during periods of uncertainty, without ultimately finding sufficient evidence for practical use. Both interpretations contain elements of truth. The programs unquestionably existed. The experiments unquestionably took place. The debate concerns what the results actually mean. Today, those declassified records remain an important part of the history of telepathy research. They demonstrate that questions once dismissed as fantasy were, at least for a time, considered worthy of careful scientific and governmental investigation. Yet perhaps the strongest claims for telepathy have never come from laboratories or intelligence agencies. They come from ordinary people. Parents who somehow sensed their children were in danger. Twins who felt each other's pain across great distances. Couples who seemed to communicate without speaking. These deeply personal experiences continue to fuel one of the oldest debates in the study of the human mind. Part 7: Twins, Families, and Extraordinary Mental Connections. Of all the stories associated with telepathy, none are more famous than those involving identical twins. Again and again, twins have described experiences that seem almost impossible to explain. One twin suddenly feels anxious without knowing why. Hours later, they learn that their sibling was involved in an accident. A twin awakens in the middle of the night with a sharp pain in the chest. The following morning, they discover their brother had been hospitalized at nearly the same time. Others describe calling each other at exactly the same moment, finishing one another's sentences, or sharing identical dreams. These stories have fascinated scientists for more than a century. Because identical twins share virtually the same genetic makeup and often grow up in remarkably similar environments, they provide a unique opportunity to study the relationship between biology, psychology, and human connection. Some researchers have wondered whether twins might also share an unusual form of mental communication. Numerous experiments have attempted to test this idea. In some studies, one twin viewed emotional photographs while the other remained isolated in another room. Researchers measured brain activity, heart rate, skin conductance, and other physiological responses to determine whether the distant twin reacted at the same moment. A few experiments reported intriguing correlations. Others found no significant effects. Overall, the evidence has remained inconsistent. No widely accepted scientific study has demonstrated reliable telepathy between twins under controlled laboratory conditions. Even so, many psychologists acknowledge that identical twins often develop extraordinarily deep emotional understanding. Having shared the same womb, the same childhood, and many of the same experiences. They frequently become exceptionally skilled at reading one another's behavior. Tiny changes in facial expression, subtle differences in tone of voice, habitual patterns. Years of shared experience allow them to anticipate each other's thoughts with remarkable accuracy. To outside observers, this can appear almost psychic. In reality, much of it may reflect extraordinary familiarity rather than paranormal communication. Similar reports occur among parents and children. Many parents describe waking moments before their baby begins to cry. Others suddenly experience overwhelming concern shortly before learning that a child has been injured or become seriously ill. Some mothers and fathers say they simply knew something was wrong. Psychologists point out that parents remain highly attentive to their children's routines. Even while asleep, many continue responding to subtle sounds that others barely notice. Years of caregiving create exceptionally strong emotional awareness. This heightened sensitivity may account for many experiences that initially appear telepathic. Yet certain stories remain difficult to explain through ordinary observation alone. Parents sensing emergencies occurring hundreds of miles away. Adult children suddenly thinking intensely about a parent at the exact time that parent suffers a medical crisis. Close friends contacting each other after experiencing the same vivid dream. Couples reporting identical thoughts simultaneously. These experiences are remarkably common. Surveys suggest that a large percentage of people believe they have experienced some form of spontaneous telepathy at least once in their lives. Whether these events reflect genuine mind-to-mind communication or the natural mathematics of coincidence remains uncertain. Human beings generate thousands of thoughts every day. Occasionally, two people will inevitably think similar thoughts at similar times. Most of those coincidences pass unnoticed. The rare ones that align with meaningful events become unforgettable. This selective memory plays an important role in how we interpret unusual experiences. Researchers such as psychologist Rupert Sheldrake have explored these everyday reports in greater detail. Sheldrake became well known for conducting surveys and experiments involving telephone calls. Participants attempted to identify who was calling before answering the phone. Some studies reported success rates modestly above chance, particularly when callers were close friends or family members. Supporters viewed these findings as suggestive evidence of telepathy. Critics questioned the methodology and argued that further independent replication was necessary before drawing strong conclusions. Regardless of one's interpretation, these studies highlight an important point. The strongest claims for telepathy rarely come from dramatic laboratory demonstrations. They emerge from ordinary human relationships. Between spouses, parents and children, lifelong friends, and especially identical twins. Whether these experiences represent extraordinary intuition, deep emotional familiarity, unconscious pattern recognition, coincidence, or an unknown aspect of consciousness remains unresolved. Perhaps that uncertainty explains why telepathy continues to capture our imagination. It touches something deeply personal. Our desire to believe that the bonds connecting us may be stronger than distance itself. Modern neuroscience now offers new tools for exploring these questions. Rather than asking only whether telepathy exists, scientists are increasingly investigating how the brain creates empathy, intuition, prediction, and social understanding. Those discoveries are revealing that the human mind may already be far more interconnected than we once imagined, even without invoking the paranormal. Part 8: Neuroscience, Consciousness, and the Future of Telepathy. As our understanding of the brain has advanced, the study of telepathy has entered a new phase. Rather than asking only whether thoughts can travel between minds, scientists have begun exploring a broader question. Why do people sometimes feel deeply connected to one another in ways that seem almost impossible to explain? Modern neuroscience has revealed that the human brain is an extraordinary prediction machine. Every second, it analyzes countless pieces of information. Facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, eye movement, breathing patterns, past experiences, emotional memories. Most of this processing happens below the level of conscious awareness. As a result, people often reach accurate conclusions without knowing how they arrived at them. What feels like a sudden psychic insight may sometimes be the brain recognizing subtle patterns too quickly for conscious thought to catch up. Researchers refer to this as unconscious processing or implicit cognition. It is one reason intuition can seem almost magical. Consider a close friendship. After years together, you may recognize tiny changes in the other person's voice that no one else notices. You might know they are upset before they admit it. You may predict exactly how they will respond in a conversation. These abilities do not require telepathy. They reflect the brain's remarkable capacity to learn patterns over time. Another important discovery involves mirror neurons. These specialized brain cells become active not only when we perform an action, but also when we observe someone else performing that same action. Although mirror neurons are sometimes oversimplified in popular media, they are thought to contribute to empathy, imitation, and social understanding. They help explain why emotions can spread rapidly through groups. Why we instinctively smile when others smile. Or feel anxious when someone nearby is frightened. This emotional resonance can create a powerful sense of connection. Yet it differs from the transmission of specific thoughts from one mind to another. The distinction is important. Neuroscience strongly supports empathy. It has not demonstrated that detailed thoughts or images can be transmitted directly between brains without conventional communication. Researchers have also explored whether brains can become synchronized. Using electroencephalography, or EEG, scientists have observed that people engaged in conversation, music, teamwork, or shared attention sometimes display similar patterns of brain activity. This phenomenon is known as brain synchrony. However, synchrony does not imply telepathy. It reflects people responding to the same environment, shared experiences, and social interaction rather than exchanging thoughts directly. Technology has introduced another fascinating development. Scientists are now building brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, capable of translating certain patterns of brain activity into digital signals. In experimental settings, individuals have used these systems to control robotic limbs, operate computers, and even communicate by thought when they are unable to speak. Researchers have also demonstrated simple forms of brain-to-brain communication using computers as intermediaries. In these experiments, one participant's brain signals are recorded electronically and transmitted through technology to another participant, allowing the transfer of very limited information. Although these systems are sometimes described as telepathy, they rely entirely on sophisticated equipment. They are technological achievements rather than evidence of natural psychic abilities. Still, they raise profound questions. If technology can one day allow direct communication between brains, how different would that be from the ancient dream of telepathy? Perhaps humanity is creating, through engineering, what generations once imagined through myth. Meanwhile, consciousness itself remains one of science's greatest unsolved mysteries. How does subjective experience arise from billions of neurons? Why does awareness exist at all? Could consciousness involve processes not yet fully understood? These questions remain open. Some researchers believe future discoveries may fundamentally change our understanding of the mind. Others argue that current neuroscience already provides increasingly complete explanations for experiences once considered paranormal. At present, there is no widely accepted scientific evidence that natural telepathy has been demonstrated reliably under controlled conditions. Yet neither has every reported experience been fully explained. The mystery continues because human experience is often more complex than simple answers allow. Perhaps the greatest lesson from more than a century of telepathy research is one of humility. The brain is vastly more sophisticated than we once imagined. Human relationships are deeper than we often recognize. And consciousness remains one of the final frontiers of scientific exploration. Whether telepathy ultimately proves to be an undiscovered ability, an extraordinary form of intuition, or a powerful illusion created by the brain, its history has already transformed the way we think about perception, connection, and the hidden capacities of the human mind. The search continues. And with every new discovery, we come a little closer to understanding not only how we communicate, but what it truly means to be conscious.